beginning.
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four.
I herald your end.
The biggest event of the summer.
I herald Galactus.
Has arrived.
What is that? Hold on!
We will fight this together as a family.
Johnny, now!
Marvel Studios' The Fantastic Four First Steps. Only in theaters Friday. Rated PG-13. Some material may not be suitable for children under 13. Get tickets now.
Marketers, you know that feeling when your content just works? When you crush a viral trend before 10 a.m.? When one tiny tweak to a landing page sends click-through rates through the roof? That's Contentful. Dynamic content made blissfully simple. Contentful helps you create and launch personalized experiences instantly across any digital channel. No stress, no limits. Only possibilities. Come get the feels at Contentful.com.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
EVO. This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. They said Jack Spillman was strange. Not dangerous, at first. Just strange. He'd sit for hours at the edge of a forested ridge in eastern Washington, watching the hills roll out beneath him like fur. Locals saw him there, cross-legged, silent, as still as an animal waiting to strike. He didn't carry binoculars. He didn't bring a notebook. He just watched. But it wasn't deer he was tracking, not elk, not cougars. He was watching wolves. He once told a childhood friend that wolves were misunderstood, that they weren't monsters, but models. The perfect predator, patient, coordinated, and merciless. He admired them not just for their strength, but for their instincts, the way they stalked, studied, struck. They didn't kill out of anger. They killed out of need. And Jack Spillman needed to believe that he was one of them. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to The Werewolf Butcher. So, obviously, my summer vacation interest in the werewolves of Europe isn't fully satisfied. I want to take one more bite at the apple here with an American story. It's fairly recent, and it's disturbingly true. Hold on tight. This one gets pretty brutal. Jack Spillman lived in a part of the state that time seemed to pass over. A rural corridor dotted with trailer homes, vacant farms, and timber that hadn't been harvested in decades. The kind of place where secrets don't stay buried, but they don't get reported either. As a teenager, he kept to himself. As a man, he moved like he was trying to disappear into the trees. But he had a job, of sorts. He worked odd shifts. He blended in enough to avoid questions. And beneath that skin, a new creature was gestating. In the daylight, he was nearly invisible. Neighbors would describe him as quiet, polite even. The kind of man who held the door open but never made eye contact. He drove a beat-up pickup, he paid in cash, he lived alone. But when night came, when the moon rose, something else stirred. He would walk into the hills with no flashlight, no gear. Just the clothes on his back and the sound of his own breath. But he wasn't camping. He was studying. In his journals, never intended to be read by anyone but himself, he didn't refer to his future victims as women or girls. He called them prey. Each entry read like a hunter's log. He observed women in grocery stores, at gas stations, outside schools. He didn't write down their names, just descriptions, times, locations, whether they were alone, whether they noticed him. Spillman wasn't interested in companionship. He didn't seek vengeance. He didn't crave attention. He wanted to hunt. Not like a human, like something older, something wilder. He studied the wolves of northern Idaho and the high deserts of Washington like monks study scripture. He learned their hierarchy, their pack structure, their kill sequences, not from textbooks, but from the field. Muddy hillsides and moonlit trails. He followed tracks. He collected shed fur. At night, he would lie flat in the brush and listen, ears tuned not to voices, but to growls and movement. He believed there was something sacred in the way wolves moved, something unburdened by guilt or hesitation. In his fantasy, he wasn't a man at all. He was evolving. He believed in something he never said aloud, that human rules didn't apply to him anymore. He wasn't interested in society. He wasn't planning a rebellion. He wasn't preparing for a ritual. He wrote about it in cryptic terms. He called it the thinning, or the shedding, or the convergence. He believed that with the right act, the right sacrifice, he could transition, that his body would follow where his mind already lived. He began to practice silence, fasting. He trained his body, lifting weights, jogging through thick woods in heavy boots. When asked why he did it, he once replied, "Wolves don't need reasons." The people around him, what few there were, saw only the surface. An eccentric, a loner, maybe even a bit broken, but not dangerous. There was no history of violence, no outbursts, no police record. But deep in the woods, in the private corners of his mind, a plan was forming. A test. A moment that would prove once and for all whether he was still a man or something else. That preparation culminated in April of 1995. The victims were a mother, Rita Huffman, and her two daughters, Kimberly, 15, and Amber, just 8. They lived outside Spokane in a modest home nestled between old farmland and state timberland. They had no enemies, no secrets, just bad luck. Their deaths were not just murders. They were obliterations. What Jack Spillman did to them would defy even the most experienced investigators. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was surgical, ritualistic, and horrifying. The attack came during the night. There were no signs of forced entry, no barking dogs, no screaming neighbors, just silence and then savagery. When investigators arrived, they found not a crime scene, but a slaughterhouse. Blood painted the walls. Bodies were posed as if on display. And one detail, held back from the public at the time, shocked even seasoned detectives. The killer had taken his time. He wasn't rushed, he wasn't scared. He was performing. And that, more than anything, is what terrified them. Jack Spillman didn't just want to kill. He wanted to transform, to become. And to do that, he believed, the act itself had to be pure, intentional, and predatory. He thought he was becoming something new. But what he was becoming was the wolf within. The call came just before dawn. A neighbor had grown concerned when Rita Huffman didn't show up for work at the small-town clinic where she'd been a nurse for nearly 15 years. She was dependable, almost to a fault. So when her car remained in the driveway, the porch light still on from the night before, her friend stepped inside to check. What she found ruptured the town's sense of safety and would soon draw national attention to a killer who didn't murder for thrill, revenge, or money. She ran screaming into the street, barefoot and shaking, and within minutes, local law enforcement was on the scene. The first responders who entered the Huffman home would carry those images with them for the rest of their lives. The bodies of Rita Huffman and her 2 daughters, Kimberly and Amber, had been mutilated with a level of cruelty that defied logic. This was no crime of passion, no drunken rampage. This was deliberate, meticulous, and orchestrated. No broken locks, no shattered windows. The home hadn't been ransacked, valuables were untouched. The television still played softly in the living room. But in the back bedrooms, a very different world had been constructed, one soaked in blood and horror. Each victim had been posed, not just left where they fell, but arranged, arms extended, faces turned toward the ceiling, mouths slightly parted as if caught mid-scream. Kimberly had been laid out on her bed, her torso opened with almost surgical precision. Amber had been found on the floor beside her sister, her body twisted unnaturally, eyes wide open. Rita had been found last, in the hallway, her face beaten beyond recognition. Investigators later determined that she had tried to fight back. The defensive wounds on her hands were deep, almost bone-exposing. But she had just been overwhelmed. The crime scene told a story of control, not chaos. As stated, the killer took his time. There was no sign of a struggle in the main living areas, no overturned furniture, no screams heard by neighbors. It was as if the killer had moved through the house like a shadow. Silent, precise, and unstoppable. The medical examiner would later testify that the mutilations had been done post-mortem, which, in some ways, made it worse. It meant that the violence wasn't about killing. It was about what came after, about transformation, about ritual. When detectives began the long, painstaking task of canvassing the neighborhood and reconstructing the Huffmans' final hours, they kept coming back to one chilling truth. This wasn't random. It wasn't impulsive. It was personal, but not in the usual sense. Jack Spillman had fantasized about this night for years. He had written about it in coded language, not names or dates, but symbols, shapes, lunar phases, diagrams of musculature and anatomy, lists of women he referred to only as the herd. Some were marked with check marks, others were crossed out. When investigators searched Spillman's room, once he was later arrested for a different incident, they uncovered drawings. Women with elongated limbs and animal heads, their eyes blacked out, stomachs split open like prey. And next to each illustration, small notations. Cycle complete, midnight purge, consume to become. These weren't just fantasies. They were steps, they were instructions or preparations. In one of his more disturbing journal entries, Spillman described the act of dismemberment not with horror or apology, but with fascination. He compared it to field dressing a deer, the placement of cuts, the efficiency of removing tissue, and the draining of blood. It must be clean, he wrote. It must be correct. The body deserves respect. The wolf honors what it takes. He wasn't trying to be poetic. He was documenting a belief system. The media would soon dub him the Werewolf Butcher. Headlines splashed across Washington state and beyond. Man or monster, werewolf ritual killer in custody. But Spillman never called himself that, not once. To him, this wasn't fantasy, it wasn't myth. He wasn't playing at being a monster. He believed he was evolving beyond man. His fixation on wolves wasn't decorative. It was a roadmap. He didn't wear fur, he didn't howl at the moon, he didn't need to. Because in his mind, he wasn't mimicking the wolf. He was the wolf. In many mythologies, the werewolf transformation requires a ritual, a bite, a curse, a moonlit night. But for Spillman, the transformation was internal. Psychological, philosophical even. He believed that through domination, destruction, and consumption, he could shed the human shell that limited him. That the act of killing wasn't just an outlet, it was a doorway. He was very specific about pain. He believed it was the trigger, that by inflicting pain and watching it manifest, he could access something ancient inside himself, something buried beneath reason and morality. He didn't want to erase his humanity. He wanted to transcend it. This belief shaped every choice he made, from the timing of the attack to the way he entered the home. He selected the Huffmans not for who they were, but for what they represented. A domestic unit, a family, a mother and daughters, symbols of nurture and civilization. To kill them was to kill the concept. To dismember them was to dismantle the illusion of control, the illusion of safety. What's most chilling about Jack Spillman isn't the gore or even the premeditation. It's the conviction. He didn't stumble into murder. He studied it. He practiced it in his mind over and over, like a rite of passage. And when the moment came, he did not hesitate. He celebrated. Later, one investigator would describe the scene as the most organized chaos he'd ever seen. It wasn't just that he killed them, he said. It's that he planned for them to be found that way, like he wanted to send a message, but only to himself. Because Spillman didn't call the police, he didn't try to claim credit. He disappeared into the background, returning to his old routines as if nothing had changed. But something had. To him, the ritual had worked. He had done what was required. He had made the kill. Now the next phase could begin. And the town, unknowingly, had just woken up to the presence of a predator who believed he no longer had anything human left to lose.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
Choice Hotels get you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. Let's get real close to hear the maximum sizzle of Comfort Inn's free hot breakfast. Maximized. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Your burger is served. And this is our finest Pepsi Zero Sugar. Its sweet profile perfectly balances the savory notes of your burger.
That is one perfect combination. Burgers deserve Pepsi.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
What Jack Spillman didn't count on was DNA. By 1995, forensic science had already begun to reshape the way law enforcement approached violent crime. The days of fingerprint-only evidence and hunch-based arrests were fading. Technology was moving forward. Silent witnesses, blood, hair, skin, fluids, were finally learning to speak. And in the case of the Werewolf Butcher, they were screaming. Crime scene analysts combed the Huffman home for over 36 hours. No surface went untouched. They vacuumed fibers from carpets. They collected hair strands from pillowcases, photographed every inch of every room. And then there were the samples. Tissue, fluids, things left behind that suggested the killer hadn't just been brutal. He had been intimate with the crime. It was a single trace amount of semen, discovered during autopsy, that gave investigators their biggest lead. A biological signature. It didn't belong to anyone in the household. It wasn't consistent with any known acquaintances or previous records. At the time, there was no name attached to it, but the profile was logged, waiting. Weeks later, in a different part of Washington, Jack Spillman made his first visible mistake. He stalked a young woman, followed her, watched her, then broke into her house. But this time, she escaped. She ran, she called the police, and she gave a description. Spillman was picked up for questioning, and as was standard procedure, officers took a saliva swab and fingerprints. He was processed and held for trespassing and attempted burglary. He didn't resist. He was calm, even cooperative. He had no idea that the lab was already waiting. The DNA match came back fast, quicker than even the detectives expected. The profile from the Huffman scene and the profile from Spillman's sample were a match. Statistically, it could only be him. When they searched his truck, they found a hunting knife with dried blood in the seams of the handle. When they searched his home, they found more. Knives, multiple, all of them sharpened meticulously. A bundle of clothing, washed, but still stained faintly with what luminol confirmed as blood. And beneath a false panel in a closet, they found drawings. Dozens of them. Charcoal sketches of wolves, human-animal hybrids, women with blacked-out eyes and claw marks down their torsos, diagrams of anatomical precision, cuts along tendons, arteries, vital organs, and most disturbingly, a spiral-bound notebook labeled Map of the Hunt. Inside, a list of names. First names only, all women. Some with addresses, others with vague descriptors. Red hair, works late, sits alone. Several were crossed out. A few were marked with an X. And then came the journals. They were filled with pages of fragmented thoughts, written in tight, slanted script. Some lines read like poetry, others like commandment. The wolf doesn't hesitate. Pain is the door. She screamed. The scream confirms the boundary. I stepped through. Psychiatrists and profilers were brought in. What they found was a cocktail of disorders. Narcissism, antisocial tendencies, obsessive-compulsive traits. But the prevailing diagnosis was sexual sadism disorder, combined with delusional self-concept transformation. In layman's terms, Spillman believed his identity was evolving, that he wasn't just killing for gratification, he was killing to complete a metamorphosis, to activate something dormant inside him. He believed pain and blood were catalysts. Spillman didn't fight the charges. He didn't confess either. He simply existed, sat in court without emotion. He made no eye contact with the surviving family members. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. One court reporter said he looked less like a man on trial than a creature observing a ritual, silent, still, waiting. When prosecutors laid out the evidence, there was little room for doubt. The DNA, the drawings, the journals, the timeline, and perhaps most chilling of all, just the emotional void. He showed no signs of remorse, not a twitch, no reaction, like it had all been inevitable. He told one forensic psychologist that he had no desire for fame, that notoriety meant nothing to him. He didn't want to be known. He wanted to be feared, but not feared as a man, feared as something else. It was that comment, small, almost whispered, that sent a ripple through the criminal psychology world, because it echoed something many had suspected, that Spillman didn't view himself as a criminal or a murderer or even a human. He believed he was becoming something other. The wolf mythology, used by Spillman as a framework, wasn't costume or posturing, it was gospel. He believed wolves were honest, that their violence was sacred, that in a world full of hypocrisy, a predator was the only creature without sin. He aspired to be that predator. In his mind, he had crossed the veil, not legally or biologically, but spiritually. And through ritual, each kill brought him closer to his truest self. What Spillman didn't understand, or maybe didn't care about, was the simplicity of his undoing. It wasn't ancient or arcane. It wasn't supernatural. It was science, cold, logical, and microscopic. A drop of fluid, a strand of hair, a sliver of skin under a fingernail. The monster was brought down, not by fire or silver bullets, but by centrifuges and comparison databases, by people in lab coats with beakers and scalpels. And there's a quiet poetry in that for all his myth-making and ritual, for all his obsession with wolves and blood and transcendence, he was caught because his body, so eager to transform, left behind the one thing it couldn't hide: its own biology. Jack Spillman remains a symbol, not just of horror, but of hubris. A predator who believed in his own ascension so completely that he forgot the oldest rule of the hunt. The more you leave behind, the easier you are to follow. Jack Spillman is serving a life sentence without parole. He remains in a Washington state prison, mostly silent. He doesn't grant interviews, he doesn't appeal. He exists like a ghost in a system built to hold men who still believe they're human. Spillman, on the other hand, believed he was something else entirely. When he was first sentenced, he didn't flinch. There wasn't an outburst or a plea for mercy. He just nodded, as though a final box had just been checked. The trial, the evidence, the courtroom, all just noise in the aftermath of what he considered a completed ritual. For law enforcement and psychologists, his case became something more than just a procedural win. It became a subject of study, a cautionary tale of myth, obsession, and transformation. Today, his journals and drawings are studied in forensic psychology programs. His interviews, limited as they are dissected line by line. And the house where the Huffmans once lived, it's gone. Demolished, the ground paved over. But the memory remains. The idea of what happened there, the intensity, the calculated brutality, haunts the region to this day. Spillman's legacy isn't one of body count. He wasn't prolific in the way some serial killers are measured. He didn't leave a trail across state lines or tease police with riddles. What makes him enduring is not how many he killed, but why he killed. He used the myth of the werewolf not as an excuse, but as a framework, a code, an identity. He believed that transformation was real, not in the Hollywood sense, but in the psychological, symbolic sense. That by dominating, destroying, and consuming his victims, he was shedding the fragile limitations of being human. That violence was a sacrament. What makes Spillman so terrifying is that he didn't see his crimes as evil. He saw them as necessary. In his mind, he wasn't desecrating anything. He was fulfilling a purpose. He was hunting. Spillman once wrote, "The wolf does not feel guilt. Guilt is for the prey." That line is now cited in dozens of academic articles examining moral disengagement in violent offenders. It's not just chilling. It's a glimpse into a mind that had fully separated itself from human accountability. He didn't need to rationalize what he had done. He'd elevated it. We often look to mythology to explain the unexplainable. Vampires as metaphors for addiction, zombies for conformity, werewolves for rage. But Jack Spillman turned that metaphor on its head. He didn't use the werewolf myth to describe his emotions. He used it to erase them, to override guilt, to silence doubt. In his world, morality was a leash, and he had to chew through it. There's a debate that continues to echo in forensic circles. Was Spillman delusional? Or did he use the werewolf motif as a convenient filter to process his sadism? Some say he truly believed that he'd immersed himself so deeply in the identity of the predator that there was no longer a distinction between fantasy and action. Others argue that the werewolf was just a mask, a symbol chosen to justify what he wanted to do anyway. But in the end, it hardly matters because the result is the same. 3 lives lost, ritualized violence, a town traumatized, and a killer who still, to this day, shows no remorse. There are rumors that Spillman still draws wolves in prison, that he refuses to speak unless absolutely necessary, and that he fasts during full moons. None of it's confirmed, but none of it really feels unlikely. Because whether he truly believed in the myth or not, he created it. And that myth now exists outside of him, etched into textbooks, whispered in true crime forums and podcasts, and passed around in late-night conversations like a modern-day boogeyman. Jack Spillman, again, isn't remembered because he was prolific. He's remembered because he became a symbol, a man who chose to abandon humanity, not with words, but with a blade. His story isn't about fangs or full moons. It's not about silver bullets or shape-shifting. It's about the stories we tell ourselves to justify the worst parts of who we are. About how fantasy, unchecked, can become framework. About how identity, twisted, can become ideology. He wasn't possessed. He wasn't insane. He was deliberate. And that, more than anything else, is what makes him a monster. Thanks for listening to The Devil Within. If you have a story, theory, or artifact tied to this case or any other, we want to hear it. Email us at info@evocreative.com or follow us at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram. Don't forget to rate and review The Devil Within on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us keep the darkness alive. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For The Devil Within, I'm Brandon Morgan, your writer and host.